Welcome to the Home Team Sacramento podcast. I'm your host, Josh Takimoto, and today we have a very special guest. She is a former athletic director, basketball coach, and current CIF director, Cici Robinson. How's it going?
It's going really well. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're so excited to have a conversation with you. And I'm gonna be honest with you. I tell guests this sometimes when I'm doing my research and looking into our guests and looking into their bios. Yours is fairly lengthy. Like you have a lot of experience. And I'm
Really?
like,
I was going to think, I've seen the people that you have on this show, and I was like, oh, it's going to be a quick one.
no. It's funny. Everybody's so humble. All of our guests always say that. It's like, what am I supposed to talk about? It's like, we'll figure it out. Just let us let us lead the charge. We're a couple of motor mouths, so we'll have some great conversation. But no, I mean, I just looked at your bio on the CIF website, and it's like, man, you've kind of had a hand in a lot of different things, which is probably really helpful for what you do now. Like you've seen it from so many different perspectives, coaching, athletic director. I mean, all of that. So that being said, I'm going to stop talking. Can you just explain a little bit about, what your athletic background is, your coaching background, and then how you got to where you are today?
Sure. I'd love to. I'm going to say a lot of luck, some hard work, and a whole lot of incredible mentors along the way that have just kind of opened up ideas and thoughts of, that looks fun. I could try that. I wonder if I'd be good at that. All those sorts of things just put me on this path. Sports has always been a part of my life. I was very lucky to have a mom and dad that emphasized that from the beginning. Busy is good, active is good. And my mom especially would drive me anywhere. She would watch anything. I mean, she honestly still does. I play indoor soccer in adult leagues, and she'd ask what time is the game, and she will be there, sometimes in her pajamas because it's a 10 o'clock at night game. But
I love
there
that.
honestly is not a better fan than my mom. So it was all the activities you could possibly think of growing up: soccer, golf, basketball, and just it kept whatever activity I was doing, it was my favorite. And then the next season would come and it was my favorite. And then honed into a few. Was a multi-sport athlete in high school. I played volleyball and basketball and softball. Was fortunate enough to be on incredible teams with really great coaches. I was part of, back in the day, the El Camino girls basketball dynasty under Bill Baxter. And we went to the state championship 3 times. We won it when I was a sophomore and lost in the finals my junior and senior year. Just things you kind of take for granted. It became this thing that we did. Yeah, we go to the state championship. Oh, it's not normal. I think it wasn't until I became an athletic director that I was like, wow, I should have paid attention and just soaked it in a tiny bit more, because those are rare. But it's fun to tell the story, and names on the wall make you look a whole lot better than you actually were. And I could tell the kids, I was on the team, I loved it, but there were others that were so much better. But they don't believe me. They just see the name and they go with it.
That's all that matters.
Exactly. Had a really incredible experience in high school. I was busy, I was active, I was part of the student government leadership stuff. And I had a great time. I went to college, and after college, just tried to figure out what I was going to do. I thought, I'm going to be a sports broadcaster. You get the best seat in the house. It
Yeah,
totally makes sense.
that's a good
And
point.
then you realize it's far more complicated than that. Tried my hand at working at an advertising agency right out of college. And the best day I had there was a day somebody brought in their kids because the babysitter was sick. And I watched the kids and I was like, this is where I should be. This is
Oh,
I need to be with kids. And I actually started my teaching credential the next week. This is where I belong.
really? Wow.
And then I thought, all right, well, I really loved high school, had a great experience. That's where I should be, so I can give back. And you realize how important that piece is. And I loved where I graduated, which was El Camino High School. And I thought, well, I should just go back there.
Yeah.
And went there and was able to now teach with my former teachers and coaches and coach with them and, be given a hard time and called all kinds of funny names, got lots of nicknames really early on,
I bet.
but they took me under their wing. They showed me how everything works. I was the program at El Camino when I started, the PE program, really well respected. And I just learned a ton from this surrounding community that made me love what I did, made me love coaching. Then I coached with Bill Baxter for a long time and started off as freshman and then JV. And the best part would be after games, he would give me a yellow note with all the things, either that I did wrong or should have done differently, or things that the kids messed up on certain plays. It was like my report card after every game. It was pretty
Oh,
hilarious.
that's awesome. That's so cool.
In
That's,
the midst of in the midst of
yeah.
all of that, he decided that he was going to go to Sac State, and I thought, well, I can either take over for the program for him, or I could take over as athletic director. And I thought, I'd probably be better at being an athletic director. My family was growing. I had 2 kids, and I thought if I was an athletic director, they could come with me to things and kind of be on the sideline with me and get to see lots of different activities instead of watching from the stands as I coached. They were really supportive, but it's just not the same amount of interaction. After games, my husband would nicely say they either played really well or they played really poorly, and that was kind of it. So it felt a little more family friendly, which is funny because it's still incredibly demanding, but yeah.
That's yeah, I have so many things to ask right now. I've
So
been sorry. No, that's great. That's always a good sign of the interview. Like when the guest gives their background and like off that's like all these little branches. Um, so I'm gonna start. So I'm gonna start with this. I just took a note here. So obviously the name of this podcast is called Home Team, and we're talking about Sacramento, the surrounding areas. And I think that's so cool that you were able to come back to El Camino, where you grew up, where you went to high school, where you played, to be a coach and teacher there. And it sounds your story sounds very similar to Kira McKechnie, who we had on the podcast a little while ago, who's the softball coach at Christian Brothers High School.
okay,
She's had
yes,
the very similar thing, and now she's coaching at the same school she grew up in. Same
yeah,
thing. Certain coaches are giving her a hard time or giving her like books that they used to use.
oh
What, like
yeah.
what a special feeling. So like when you first like your first day being back at El Camino as a teacher, was it just like a surreal moment?
So surreal. I mean, between walking in the locker room and looking at your old lockers
Yeah.
and walking into the teacher lounge that first probably month or so, when it used to be this forbidden place that you went into, and now it was your safety zone where you got a few minutes away from kids, to sitting at the table at lunch because the PE department used to sit together and
Yeah.
hearing the things that they talked about. And I was like, this is what you guys talk about every day? And just so many little pieces like that, walking down the hallways when nobody else is there.
Sure.
If a friend that went to school with me came to visit for whatever reason, rewatching it through their eyes was always fantastic. Like, man, it looks so much smaller than it used to, almost every time.
So funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, what a cool experience. Like we've talked to a couple coaches that were in very similar situations. Casey Taylor, we had a conversation with him. Oak Ridge, now he's at Oak Ridge. Our friend Cody Norman over at Laguna Creek. It's just such a cool. It's always fun hearing those stories because everybody has a very similar interaction. Where it's like, oh, like you said, everything seems smaller, or
Uh-huh.
it's not as intimidating or as exciting maybe as it once was. Like, oh, now it's work. Now I have to watch everybody that I used to hang out with, which is kind of a crazy thing. Um, so my other part of what the other little branch of what you said was the part about deciding to be an athletic director over being a coach because of the family element. And that's something that we've talked about a lot on this podcast because it's a difficult balance because like you said, coaching takes up so much of your time. And I think we don't even realize how much of that time it takes up. And it's a huge sacrifice for the entire family, for spouses, for kids. And so it was interesting that you made that decision for that very reason, which is awesome. I think that's incredible. Like, what was your husband's thought when it came to that? Was he like, hey, you should coach, or was he like, hey, no, I think the AD thing would be better because he knew the demands
I
of
think,
what it would need.
yeah, we we talked about it a lot, and,
Yeah,
since I had been a coach for so many years, he already knew what that looked like,
sure.
and you think, "Oh, it's just basketball season," but it's not just basketball season. There's
Right.
spring league, there's fall league, there's all the summer things that you need to do. Then there's going to watch other teams, there's practice planning, and then there's film review. It's so detailed, but also so much of that is isolated.
Yeah.
It's not things that you can do with your family. And so we knew that going in. Whereas being an athletic director, it was something new, but also knowing, okay, Friday nights, yes, I have to do a ton of stuff to get uh, the fields and everything ready for games.
Right.
But when we're watching the game, as long as everything is going okay,
Sure.
they can be right next to me, and he can go open a gate or let somebody in if he needs to, and then we meet back up, or we sit and we get to watch the game and just have a tiny bit of that time together. I think made that piece appealing. And I lived 4 miles, maybe, no, really like 3 miles from the school at the time. So there were times that I would ride my bike back to school for the game, or they would meet me. And it made it really an easy decision. I think one of the pieces that worried me, and this was through talking to other people, is you don't make the same relationships that you do when you're coaching. And I took that to heart as something that I was really worried about, but I actually think that it was wrong in my opinion, for me anyway, because what it did was, instead of me having phenomenal relationships with maybe 30 to 40 girls, which was great and important, I was really able to make sure I could make relationships with athletes everywhere, and I could go watch games and I could be their biggest supporters. And instead of it being one sport in one little hand, but it was the entire school that I now felt a little more connected to and could be a part of.
That's a great answer. I love that. And it's funny because I think you might be our first athletic director we've had on this show. And it is a very different thing. And I didn't even think about the connection piece of that and how there could be that fear of, hey, there's you get to deal with, anywhere between what 12 and 20, 30 kids
Right.
versus all the kids. And you would think, oh, you just wouldn't have that much of a connection. But if it's really a matter of the effort, right? It's like with any sport, right? If you put the effort in, you can make it work. And it sounds like that was something that was really important to you, which I think is awesome.
Definitely was important. You could focus on the negative and the bad things that happen, or the meetings that you have with unhappy people and parents and those pieces.
Sure.
Or you could make sure to take kids to the character combine or to the Sac Joaquin Women in Sports Day, and those car
Yeah.
rides there, and sitting in the audience and talking to them, and the car rides back. You're making connections with golfers, tennis players, water polo players, and I noticed it made a bigger difference, and I really liked that.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting too that you said you live really close to the school, and that's
Mhm.
again, there's all these things that are just fascinating. I'm not a coach myself. I coached like one year of little league. It was a mistake. I was too young to try to do that. I shouldn't have done it, but it was luckily it was like a fall ball thing, so it was really short. But I'm always just fascinated about the decisions that coaches make on and off the field, and one of those decisions is where they choose to live when
Mhm.
they're a teacher and a coach at a school, or an AD in your case,
Mhm.
because my wife's a teacher, and I've heard a lot of teacher stories over the years, not just from her, from other people. And sometimes you have teachers where they're like, oh no, I live clear across the city because I don't want to see anybody over the weekends, and
Yes.
then other teachers are like, I bought a house literally next to the school, like I could hop the fence and be at the school because they felt like it was that important. And I don't think either one of those things is wrong, but I'm always interested when someone makes that conscious decision to live within the same community as their school is and as that where their athletic program is. So was that something that was really important to you, or did it just kind of work out that way?
Important to me for sure. And then when we moved up to Folsom and I started teaching and being the athletic director there, moving there was a huge piece of that. I think being a part of the community makes it easier to work really hard for it, because you're looking not only at the kids that you're representing that are in high school now, but you're also looking at their younger brothers and sisters, and you're thinking about how you want to continue to make things be as good as possible for them because you know they're coming up next.
I love that. See, Coach, this is why we had you on the show. You were joking earlier. It's like, what am I going to say? This is why we have people like yourself on this show, because I'm taking notes as you're talking, so I don't want to forget these things that you're saying. So, I think that's an amazing way to look at it, and especially for like the legacy of a school, the tradition of a school.
Mhm.
Um, building those, leaving those stepping stones or those clues for the following generation, I think is really cool. And I think that's why you go to these schools and you see generations after generations of kids and families that still go to that school, because they understand that there's something special at that place.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I definitely want to jump into your transition into being a CIF director, but I have to ask. So
Okay.
it sounds like you went from El Camino to Folsom. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now that has to be a really interesting thing from the sports perspective, because anybody who's in Sacramento or the surrounding areas knows, anybody in Northern California knows, specifically if we're talking about like football,
Mhm.
um, Folsom is a monster of a program. And
Mhm.
so, and that's not to take anything away from El Camino or any other school, but I mean, the bottom line is those are two different beasts.
Yeah.
So what was that like going from, a Friday night at El Camino where, you have a certain amount of people to, I'll tell you this. One time I tried to go to a couple of years ago, I tried to go to the De La South Folsom game.
Mhm.
Not being that bright, I thought, oh, I can just go there and get tickets. And the lady laughed at us. She's like, oh, you don't have tickets? You're not getting in. I'm like, oh, okay. So
Nice try, but yeah.
pretty much it's like, so, well, we made our way up the hill and watched from the outskirts of the stadium.
You
It's
know,
a very, what's,
they call that Cheapskate Hill.
yeah, I was there with a lot of other people. But like it's an incredible thing, especially if you're driving down 50 or up 50 on a Friday night. I mean, it's an event when you go
Mhm.
there. So what
Yeah.
was that experience like for you going from a smaller school to like a massive situation like Folsom?
It was definitely intentional. I thought, okay, I like this. I want to be an athletic director. What would be my next step? And to me, it was all right. Let's try what D1 might look like bigger. Because then I was thinking, what would my next step be after that? If this is where I want to go, I better keep experiencing new pieces. And it was incredible. I mean, one of the pieces that make El Camino smaller is there's a lot, it's a condensed area with a lot of high schools in a small amount of areas. So everyone is kind of divided because within a 7 mile radius, I think there's 5 or 6 high schools.
Right.
And so it gets really spread out. You get up to Folsom and there's 2 high schools that are just in that town, and the support is incredible. Obviously, success breeds support, and but that didn't come easily for them. It's the coaches, they put in the work, they work tirelessly, and it was really evident in a short amount of time being on that campus and seeing what they did and the support that they had, but how well they worked together and the hours that they put in. It made you understand, okay, this is why they are as good as they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And so at what point did you decide that you wanted to make that transition over to a CIF director, and was it a difficult decision to make? Because I imagine, I mean, obviously the roles are very different, but I imagine, kind of like you mentioned earlier, going from a coach to athletic director, you were assuming that the interactions and the communication and connection was going to be different. I imagine that step's even bigger going from a school to, a CIF director. So what was that transition like for you?
It was definitely interesting because again, I went from advocating, when we're talking about coaching, you're advocating for your team. Then when you're an athletic director, you're advocating for your school. And then when you get to the point of the CIF, you now have to think big picture, and it's not just a school or a section. At the state office, you're talking about the entire state. So it opened my eyes to things that I didn't even really comprehend were being done behind the scenes for so long, because you just kind of had your tunnel vision as to what was best for your school for so long. So that was a fascinating and eye-opening for sure.
Oh,
It was really my first office job, which is
oh
very
yeah.
from being a teacher, not just a teacher, but a locker room and outside and all those pieces. I was used to a bell telling me what to do for most things,
Sure.
whether it was take a break, eat lunch, go to the bathroom, and then it was just this office life of, oh, I get to just decide when I do these things now.
You could leave for lunch. Yeah.
Yes,
Weird.
and it was you had more than 25 minutes, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But the other piece was really figuring out how to digest all the information. I remember the first time they handed me the bylaws and constitution, and I was, yeah, I'll read it, and I'm reading it. But when you don't know what to apply it to, it doesn't make as much sense as situations come up and decisions need to be made. You're constantly using this as the guidelines, and they're paying attention. I mean, what Ron Nichetti does and has to use constantly, it really is mind blowing. Don't tell him I said that though.
Oh.
He does a good job, but don't tell him.
I won't tell him.
Okay.
I also didn't know that's how you pronounce his name. I've been saying it wrong all these years, so I'm glad you said that. So I definitely will. I'm not gonna tell him. Don't worry, because I can't even pronounce his last name. Apparently, um, man, that just you saying like the bylaws, the rules, all that just makes my head hurt. Like that's not something that I would be good at. I'm better at talking behind this mic.
And
But
just understanding how the decisions were made and why the decisions were made based on all these other pieces. I just had no comprehension of that. It was somebody told you what the rules were and you followed them. But now it's, well, why are these there? Why are these the rules? And learning the historical pieces to it has been really fascinating and incredible, because they're also having to adjust as time adjusts, and what worked before doesn't always work now, but it's not a quick process.
sure.
And watching just how it all transpires has really um, been an eye opening piece to my journey for sure.
Yeah, and I imagine so. We've been following you on social media for a while between Character Combine and then obviously now Home Team. One of the things that I think is pretty evident by your Instagram account is that so it's cool hearing what you said about your mom being your biggest advocate, because to me it's very clear that you are your kid's biggest advocate as a fan of them playing sports, which I love seeing. My parents were this exact same way. In fact, I was talking to my mom earlier today about a fun story. I'm not going to repeat the story because she would kill me. Where she was, defending a bunch of kids from a crazy parent. Again, that's all I'm going to say because she's not going to be appreciative of the whole story. But it's fun. It's fun following you and seeing that, because it's obviously you're, especially hearing about your mom, you're passing that legacy on to your kids. That being said, I imagine that in your role with the CIF, that's probably it's got to be a little tricky going to their games, right? Because I'm sure you overhear stuff.
Oh yes.
And I don't know if they're all aware of what your role is when you go to games, but
No.
I imagine you hear stuff. It's like, oh, well, I'm gonna have to deal with that in the office tomorrow. So what has that been like? Because I imagine it's been challenging.
It's funny, when you want to be a parent, you put on your parent gear and you just sit and you just watch.
Yeah.
You learn to be the scorekeeper or the announcer in the booth of something, so that you don't necessarily have to sit in the stands all the time and hear the other things. So
Sure.
I also like climate controlled, as being a baseball mom.
Yeah.
Give me that scores booth where it's either warm or protected from the sun is nice.
That's the way to do it. Yeah, I imagine that, as well, especially obviously with 2020 and the pandemic. And obviously, I mean, if you went to any message board, if you went to any social media site, everybody had an opinion with how things went, right? And you being a parent of student athletes, I mean, you can't hide from it really.
Well, I think that was the first thing we would remind people of in
Yeah.
our office during 2020. There was 5 of us that had student athletes in high school. So
Really.
we would get these phone calls that talked about what was happening with kids and why aren't we doing more? You don't understand. What you really wanted to say was, actually, we very much understand. We had in the office kids that graduated in 2020 and in 2021. So we were very aware of what it was doing to kids and how hard it was. And these decisions were out of our control, but people couldn't understand that.
Right. Yeah. And that, I think that was kind of the common thing. And I remember following the whole thing, and that kind of felt like that was the message that was trying to be conveyed. It's like, obviously, everybody understands why there was so much frustration with the students not being able to play. But you guys were kind of, I mean, kind of the mouthpiece, right, for everything that was coming down. And you were just sharing the information. And unfortunately, taking a lot of that heat. So, yeah, definitely. I mean, I have two very young little girls, so I'm not at that point yet. So,
Girl
uh,
dad, I love it.
a girl dad, yeah. So I'm sure at one point, my brother was asking me the other day, he's like, "Do you think you're gonna get kicked out of a game?" I said, "I hope not," because I have a home team Sacramento podcast where we talk about character. But I can't put it past me. You never know. So, but at some point, I'm just trying to take all these notes, and hopefully they don't have to go through anything like this once they're at that point where they can compete. But just a lot of respect for all the parents and students that have battled through all of this craziness, because it can't be easy. And obviously, from your perspective, dealing with it, like, you couldn't escape it. You were on it was affecting your family, it was affecting your job, every aspect. So thank you for all the hard work and the craziness that you've had to deal with. I know it's not really over yet, but it seems like it's gotten a little bit
Still
better.
light, and we're getting championships in, and
Yeah.
that feels normal,
Yeah.
or normal-ish is what I like to say. But watching the smiles on faces, and our favorite part is the championships. Watching these kids get to compete on, for most of them, the biggest stage they have seen thus far, and for some that they'll ever see. It really is. Every day is different, every game is different, but the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat is fantastic. And you still get chills every time the gun goes off in cross country,
Yeah.
or you're watching wrestling and somebody gets pinned and the crowd goes crazy. I mean, it's why there are so many sports movies, because every time it really does give you chills.
Oh, 100%. I was just telling someone, I think me personally, I'm a baseball fan. It's my favorite sport. I was on the team in high school. I played I tell people I played freshman and sophomore year. Junior and senior was a little bit dicey. I was on the bench more, but I was still on the team. I wore the uniform.
Yes.
And so I love baseball, but I still think my favorite high school championship sport is basketball. Like, when you go to Golden One for those state championship games, like,
Mhm.
to me, there's just nothing like it. It's the most exciting event. And all the sports are great, but for some reason that one just feels different to me. Do you have I mean, I don't know if you can say this. Do you have an event that you love the most, like a certain sport event that you love the most when it comes to the championship rounds?
I've learned to appreciate them all.
Sure.
It's hard to pick a favorite. It's like a kid,
A
maybe.
favorite kid,
But I
sure.
think it was the ones that I knew the least about that have amazed me the most. And
Oh,
it goes back to cross country and track and field. Those were very, my gene pool did not produce anything that was really running related without there being a ball to distract.
sure.
So it was out of my comfort zone. And when I say you see the crowd at the starting line and then the gun go off and they just make their way through. And then the second piece to me that was absolutely mind blowing is when they cross the finish line and they collapse literally all over the place in this area. And those that are there helping to run the cross country meet know which ones are medical to catch and which ones to shoo out of the way and just let them take a minute. And it literally looks like a war zone for
Hmm.
about 2 minutes, because these kids have given it everything they have. And they fall to the ground, they rest for about 30 seconds, and then they get up and hug each other. The people that you just competed against and did everything in your power to beat, you just get up and show this level of respect that I played team sports. You just would not really have done that after
Right.
a state championship basketball game
Yeah.
that you did not win or won. You were with your teammates and you were celebrating there. In an individual sport, you have all these people around you that may or may not have been your teammates, but there's a mutual level of respect that really blows my mind. And I would say a similar thing for wrestling. It was so far out of my comfort zone,
Yeah.
and you just watch the dedication and discipline that it takes to be a part of a sport like wrestling. and it's fascinating. And in Bakersfield specifically, there is this incredible following there of people that have been coming for years and years and years. And finals, they turn off the lights and it's a spotlight and the crowd is so into it. You can't help but be a fan of a sport I never thought I'd be a fan of.
Right. Wow. Yeah. Well, wrestling is such a crazy one too, because I heard someone describe it as like, you're basically just going through hell for like a minute of glory where they raise your hand and then it's like, and I remember again playing baseball. I remember during our conditioning time, you would see the wrestlers do their thing and we would go on a mile run. It's like, whew, we're dying right now. And those guys are like, we just went on a 3 mile run. That's the start of practice. Like, oh my gosh. Like, we
And
guys
yeah,
are
they had 17 sweatshirts on while they did it.
right. Right. It's like, oh, okay, well, I guess we can't complain. Maybe we should
Right.
just go throw the ball around and hit some balls or something. But yeah, no, that's so I love that. I think, hey, I'll tell you this, if you're listening to this podcast right now and you weren't a fan of cross country or wrestling, based on that description, I feel like you should probably check it out because I think that was a great
Definitely.
description of both those things. And I like what you said too about this mutual level of respect amongst the athletes. And that actually leads me into one of my next questions. I'm going to apologize to you right now too, because I know I sent you some questions. We're so far off the beaten path right now. This has
That's
been it's been a great conversation. So that's what typically happens. My questions kind of go out the window. But one of the questions I like asking coaches is, again, going back to this idea of us being a part of this home team, wearing different uniforms, but all being a part of the same team. That being said, we still love competing against each other. We still love beating the other team.
Mhm.
So that being said, you can do both those things, like compete at the highest level while also respecting your opponent. Um, so I guess I usually ask coaches, like, is there a coach that you've competed against, that you've coached against, that was always just like a crazy battle every time you guys faced each other, and that you couldn't help but just love competing against that person, just having the utmost respect for that person? Like, do you have a coach like that? And then if so, who would that be and why?
Well, it's tricky because I was a lower level coach for so long that it changed a lot. But I could tell you that as a basketball coach at El Camino, competing against Oak Ridge was always a battle. And it was interesting at the freshman level, they would kill us. And then slowly we would make the gap be smaller and smaller, and then it would be competitive by the time they got to varsity. So it always made us feel better, but there were some rough scores when it would be those lower level games. But every time you knew it was going to be two great programs that were just battling it out, and that always will stand out, I think, for me.
And I love hearing that, because it's never, we've all been to our fair share of games where it's just, you see two teams and when those two teams walk on the field, it's like, ooh, this is gonna be a bloodbath,
Right.
not gonna be a fun one. And then, sure enough, it's just not fun to watch. You feel for both teams. Like, one team, it doesn't feel competitive, even though they're used to a higher level. The other team, they're like, I'm so defeated right now. Should I just quit playing my sport because this is awful? And when you have those battles between two amazing teams, like, it's just so much fun because you get to see, everybody like raise each other's game,
Mhm.
like you said, and there's this level of respect, even though they're, going at it, and there's maybe even some chirping going on. Like, you can just tell that there's, that passion for the game, and it creates that respect between the two teams and the two coaches. So um I always love hearing that. So um do you think you're going to go back to coaching ever? Would you ever go back to coaching?
I coached my younger son's basketball teams for a long time, and I
Oh,
coached
cool.
their soccer team. So I did do that for a while, and then I think it was time for them to hear a different voice other than mine, and to be
Sure.
told to how to do things and what to do by somebody else was pretty important. It
Sure.
would drive me crazy when they would get back in the car and say, "Oh, did you know if you do this, this, and this happens?" And I'm like, well, I've been telling you that for 5 years, but it's fine. Thanks.
Yeah.
Good. Glad you learned it.
That was my next question, because I know every parent coach has that story.
Yes.
My dad has that story. He's like,
Oh,
"Hey, I've been telling you how to pitch this way for a long time, and now you're just getting it, you clown. What's wrong
yep.
with you?" So yeah, yeah. That's my favorite thing, and I've never gotten. It's like 100% of the time the
Mhm.
same answer. It's like, oh yeah, it's like the eye roll. It's like, yeah,
Yeah.
other coach, can explain it better than I can, apparently.
Yeah, that fascinating information is brand new, huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's That's cool. So okay, so you have been, so you're not out of the game completely. You've done some
Not
coaching, and
not completely, but yes, they're getting older now. The littlest one, I didn't coach him this year, and sometimes it's hard. I need to keep score, take pictures, do something else, so that way I'm not that parent, because
sure.
I can be that parent.
Sure. Well, it's gotta be tough though, because you said earlier you still play competitive like indoor soccer, right? So
Yes.
that's, the competitiveness is still gonna come out,
Oh,
you
for
know?
sure. I mean, it could be a baby shower game, and I'm trying to win it. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. Uh,
Thankfully, my friends all know it. I don't win all the time, but I certainly try to.
yeah. Well, and that's, I've obviously like with my wife and having babies and seeing that process, I'm sure they were having conversations like, do we invite Cece to this game? Because we know
Think
how she is. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. The best my yes, my best girlfriends that have been there forever, boy, do they know.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hey, at least they know, right? So they can't
True.
be surprised, like, oh my gosh, how did this happen? It's like you guys knew what you were doing.
That's true.
Don't play certain games. Um, okay, so let me ask you this: going back to your playing days and
Mhm.
how that's affected you now, I feel like a lot of times athletes who had great coaches, which it sounds like you did, can look back and remember like crystal clear messages or phrases or pieces of advice that their coaches gave them when they were younger, and there are things that still apply to this day. Is there a specific lesson or a phrase or um, a piece of advice that your coach gave you when you were playing that you still to this day make a regular part of your life?
I don't know if it's a specific lesson so much as it is really about grit and learning to be thick-skinned and to get over things quickly, and just like turn the page because you had to learn how to do those things. Stressful situations don't get me as rattles as I think they may have had you not put yourself in those positions or been in them because of experiences with teams or with coaches. So I think it was just really a path that helped me take chances, learn things, get over things. All those pieces and moments, I think, are what I learned from all of them.
Yeah. And so, obviously you've dealt with student leader athletes. That's what Kevin likes to call them.
Okay.
It's student leader athletes, I think, or student athlete leaders, excuse me. And obviously we're part of what we do, and a big reason why we do what we do is because we believe in the impact that athletes can have, whether it be on social media, on their campuses. I mean, I think we've said it so much at this point, people are probably sick of it, but it's true. They have a massive influence on their campus. Like they're known, right? They're typically a little taller, a little bigger, more. They stand out more,
Uh-huh.
and so their voice is really important. Same with coaches in the lives, whether they're teacher coaches or just coaches that have other jobs and come in to coach. But if we're talking specifically about student athlete leaders, what do you think the impact they can have on a campus is? Because you've seen it from so many different perspectives. Like, how important is it for coaches to kind of implement that idea into their student athletes, and for student athletes to really take on that responsibility and take it seriously?
I think it's complicated for off-campus coaches
Yeah,
because they don't always understand or get to see the power that their athletes have.
yeah,
I think it can make or break programs. I think that it can change dynamics in schools, in assemblies. When you have an assembly, and Kevin would be the one to tell you, you pick out the right kid, normally an athlete, to come down and have a couple of questions answered or just have fun with, but they carry themselves the right way with the right message. And it's never a guarantee. You just have to hope that you do that. But you see all of the kids sit up a little straighter and pay attention closely to what they say and what they do, and they take it in. Whereas if it's not somebody that they necessarily look up to, they may not pay attention. They may sit back a little bit more, but the power that they have, student athletes, and just the way that they carry themselves, just what you said, the size, all those things matter too, but it's the way that they interact with adults when they watch that take place. And it could be from so far away, they don't realize other people are paying attention, but they are, especially in this day and age. Everyone's recording something, taking a picture of something, or just observing and talking about things. But all of those little tiny pieces matter, whether it's speaking to a teacher, an administrator, a freshman, if you have a senior athlete and how they're being treated, what assemblies look like. It really is a huge factor in a school that can be so powerful and so positive.
Yeah, and I've always felt too, because I was again, I joked about it earlier, but I really, my junior and senior year, those varsity levels, I really didn't play that much. I think I was a pitcher only. I think total maybe got like 12, 13 innings. I mean, I really wasn't playing that much, but as I got older, I realized looking back, it's like, man, I still had the opportunity to make an impact, even though I was, someone who sat the bench a lot. And I feel like that's important because I think sometimes we talk about this idea of athletes affecting their schools or their communities, and we automatically think of the person who is going to a D1 college or who is all league or all city or who had a major role in a state championship. But really, it's any athlete, anybody who wears the uniform, anybody who's a part of the team on that campus, like they have a leadership role. You may not be an A type personality, but even if you're a B type personality, you can still have an impact. And I mean, is that something you agree with, seeing in all these years of being at schools?
Yeah, 100%. You're taking something away from your accomplishment still, I think, because depending on the size of a school, it doesn't matter if it was 500 or 3,000, there's maybe 20 kids that are on a varsity team.
Right.
So only 20 kids are experiencing all those pieces. And I think that I spent a lot of time talking about things that weren't just D1, because there is so much more.
Right.
And it doesn't matter if it's D1. Sometimes to me, playing a sport at a junior college is even harder because there's not there the stands aren't full. You're
Right.
doing it there because you love the sport and you want to keep playing it. And that's when you learn really how much you love the sport, because it's hard work and there isn't a whole lot of fanfare, and but there's opportunity and it should all be celebrated no matter what. So that's something that's always been really important to me, is to make sure that we're acknowledging every kid.
Yeah. Yeah, so that kind of just sparked something in my mind too. I just have a couple more questions for you, and then we'll get you out of here. Like I promised, try to keep it under 45 minutes, around 45 minutes. It's never really under 45 minutes. I can be honest with myself at this point. When Kevin's here, it's usually a little tighter ship. When it's me by myself, things get a little wacky. But um, that being said, something I've always thought was really interesting, and I think you're a great example of this, is obviously when we're younger, we have these huge dreams of playing professionally, right? Maybe it's just going to like a D1 college. Maybe it's you want to play at the pro level. We all have these dreams, but we all know that the reality of it is like the 1% of the 1% make it. And it's such a small number of people that actually make it. And there's so many factors that go into it. But you have some people that put so much stock into making that dream a reality that when it doesn't happen, they're just lost because their identity is wrapped up in that thing. But I think the incredible thing, especially nowadays, is even if you can't compete on the field in your sport, you can still find ways to be involved and have a career or a livelihood that is, you know, being a part of the world of sports, like yourself. Like, you didn't go off and play at the highest levels, but your profession is at a pretty high level when it comes to this community in California, and you're interacting with athletes and coaches all the time, which is pretty cool. So like, what advice would you have to maybe an athlete who is kind of getting to that point, or maybe they're at that point where they're like, okay, my sport's over.
Mhm.
How do I stay involved? Or how can I find something that I can, some way I can stay involved with my sport while actually not competing in the sport?
I think that that's a great question. I actually really like it. And I think first, sometimes people automatically make a crazy left turn to get as far away from it as possible for a minute because they need a little separation. Those are things that I've seen happen.
Sure.
And then once they kind of come back, like, hey, I really missed that. It's paying attention to all the things that make that sport happen. And the officials, goodness, we need officials like you wouldn't believe. So I think that that's such a really cool place to start. I wish it was a more respected um, side hustle for so many to do, but they're treated so poorly by fans that it's also hard to tell a 21-year-old kid to go try to be a high school official when you know what's going to happen.
Sure.
That so that's tricky, but that piece I think is really important. I think looking at physical therapy, PT is a big one that they get into. Athletic training is a big one that they get into. If you can be an announcer, whether it's doing a podcast or play by play, or being the next, like Cameron Salerno's doing, being the next Joe Davidson,
Yeah.
there are so many areas and places to get to be a part of it that you don't even realize. And as a Sacramento area, we have the River Cats, we have the Kings, we have extra places where you can just be a part of it. And I think we're lucky in that area that there are avenues to, whether you want to be somebody that's event planning at one of the arenas or even Sac Republic. There's just a lot of opportunities that still get you, keep your toe in it. You're still in the sport that you might love or be passionate about or just enjoy, but it just looks a little different than maybe you originally thought.
I love it. And actually, I think I'm just going to end it right there. I think that was a great answer. I think that's a great way to end it. I think it's great advice for any athlete who's in that space in life right now. And I think that's probably a good way to wrap this thing up. So, do you want to throw any of your social media handles out there, or where can we follow you? I don't know if you want to do that.
They're pretty momish. So I think that I can't imagine anybody would want to be a part of my Instagram that way. But I think if you're a fan of high school sports, know what your local section is and be a part of it. If you're in the Sacramento area, Sac Joaquin section, if you like to see what's going on in the entire state of California, then it would be CIF State. Come out to games, watch the next athlete that could become a professional at something, watch the next one that could go back to their high school and be a coach. You just never know. And support your teams. I think that that's the biggest part. Support your town, support your teams, wear their colors proudly, have fun.
Let's go. I love it. That's a great piece of advice to end this thing. Uh, Coach Robinson, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us. I definitely
Thank you so
appreciate
much.
it. I would love to have you back on because, like I said, I have so many other questions I could ask you that me and my motor mouth couldn't couldn't quite squeeze in. So, but yeah, we definitely appreciate your time. Appreciate everything you're doing for with CIF, for the state, for all of our athletes and coaches. We're super thankful, and we're glad that you're a part of our home team. So, thank you so much.
Happy to be Sacktown proud, and I'll come
Hey,
back anytime. This was really fun. Thank
oh,
you.
thank you. Absolutely. All right, coach, take care.